Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's had a nice, thick steak delivered off to the races with dinner. It's lovely to meet you all and just to hear the inspiring story from the panel before us. And Seth, I think you're still out here as well. It's nice to see you. My name is Hilary. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be with you all here tonight. And I'm curious, how many of you have heard of OpenSecrets? Oh man, so many. So in case you're shy or haven't heard of us, we're an organization that compiles and maintains the largest database that details financial influence in our political system in support of transparency, accountability, and trust in the United States. So this involves tracking data on contributions to campaigns, lobbying data at both the state and federal levels. We're the only ones with both of those levels of data. Tracking foreign money entering the political system and essentially making it standardized and easy to connect the dots around how money shapes policy, issues, and elections. While my tenure with this organization is relatively recent, I joined about 5 months ago, I've had the journey and adventure of getting to know our pretty wonky, mighty organization with an origin story that dates back to the 80s. So as we're gathered here tonight, I've had a chance to reflect a bit on my first few months at OpenSecrets, and I actually wanted to begin with a quick story of my own, and perhaps in that process, make the case for transparency, particularly in a moment when truth, facts, and trust are challenged. So like my predecessors on stage, I want to start with my story. We have someone from the South and someone from the Northeast. And I grew up in a small-ish town in the heart of the Midwest in Michigan with a cold so bitter it could cut through 4 layers of clothing. Maybe some of you here know that cold. I can remember scraping ice off my parents' windshield as a teen, cursing in the dark early morning hours, and quite clearly thinking one day I'll have a choice. I went to public school. And I can recall sitting in my mandatory government and economics class and wondering, how is it possible that a country can be in debt trillions of dollars and still function? And I can also remember learning about the McCain-Feingold Act, which had recently passed in those days and might now be facing some challenges, and harboring fascination and frustration about the way government worked. I remember even then as a teen, twirling around the idea of public campaign financing in my head and thinking maybe that'd make things more fair. Needless to say, many of these big questions left me jaded about this country in my earlier years and sent me on a path to try and understand how things worked somewhere else. In fact, I wanted to flip the world as I knew it upside down. So I signed up for the Peace Corps, which, by the way, is recruiting, and which, by the way, you can do at any stage of life. It's probably my retirement plan. I was sent to a little country called Guinea, situated right in the western corridor of West Africa. How many of you have heard of Guinea? Wow. Yeah, woo, Peace Corps. I'm not talking about Equatorial Guinea, not Papua New Guinea, nor Guinea-Bissau, just Guinea. And at the time when I went, Guinea ranked in the bottom 10 of the Global Human Development Index. It had just become a democracy months before I arrived in 2011. While Guinea was an incredible pioneer in becoming the first French colony to demand and declare independence in 1958, it had spent the next 50 years under 2 dictatorships. As it turns out, dictatorships don't always bode extremely well for a country. And in Guinea, the paradox is quite challenging. While the country ranks in the bottom 10 of the Global Human Development Index, if we reordered all countries on the continent of Africa by their resource wealth, Guinea should be the second wealthiest nation next to Nigeria. It houses the world's second largest bauxite reserve, contains the world's highest grade iron ore, has diamonds that measure more than 100 carats, and it contains significant stores of gold. For a country that's roughly the size of Oregon, that's a lot of resources. I share all this because while during my time in Guinea, I experienced profound connection, deep wisdom, and a stalwart resilience in a people who, despite being essentially abandoned by their government, nevertheless persisted. I want to talk about the absolute toll that a lack of transparency can wage on a nation's people. These days, when I have conversations with people in my new role at OpenSecrets, talking about all the work that our data supports, from advocacy to journalism to academia to just basic information for the public to be informed, I sometimes hear a narrative that concerns me. Sometimes, as I listen, people feel that they've supported, advocated for, or even funded transparency efforts, and they've simultaneously witnessed a growing lack of trust in government. To me, this is a false correlation that in my mind is spoken by folks who've never truly witnessed what a genuine lack of transparency involves. In Guinea, that looked like violent protests, blockading roads with tires and cars burning up in flames, homes being vandalized and raided in the wake of an election that lacked such transparency that the region required the country to do a do-over in the months following. Indeed, this is what Guinea's first democratic election looked like in 2010. And while in that do-over election, the same candidate in the second round won and took office in 2011, the same year I arrived for my Peace Corps service, about 10 years later, as his term was expiring in 2021, that now president attempted to change the Constitution in order to stay in power. A few months later, in 2021, that president was taken hostage in a coup, and to this day, Guinea does not have a stable government in place. I share this story with you because while I'm sure that some of you might feel that there are maybe some twinges of flavors that you could perhaps relate to in your imaginations, one thing stands out to me about the United States, this country, relative to what I heard in conversations about my adoptive family and friends back in Guinea. They craved communication, fairness, and transparency in their elections and in their policies because they knew quite viscerally what it meant not to have them. Even if they weren't the ones who necessarily wanted to do the regular work of accountability, they still wanted the systems in place that could hold government accountable, especially to thwart significant abuses of power that were sometimes loud, but most often that persisted quietly and undetected until it was too late to do anything about it. So we could argue up and down whether Guinea was ready for democracy or whether democracy was ready for Guinea. But it's evident that without transparency, we can't have systems of accountability. And without systems of accountability, we don't have trust. And without trust, we don't have stable systems of government, or for that matter, democracy. Here in the US, we're obviously far from perfect. We've had our very fair share of cases of corruption and influence. Even the founding architects of this nation as we know it knew the way that special interests, often communicated in the form of money, could threaten or undermine the function of democracy, which is why, baked into the Constitution, we have a foundational value for checks and balances and accountability. And checks and balances require transparency. Transparency is the building block of democracy. And just like the foundation of your home, or my home, or rather my apartment building, is largely invisible, buried in the ground, and fairly unsexy, but vital to that home being able to stand, I do believe our work at OpenSecrets is vital and foundational to the work of democracy. And while our data might not be sexy, like the journalists who use it for reporting, or the amazing advocacy work that you all do at American Promise, I'm proud and really elated to say that we get to support the incredible work that you all do with ours. The birth of OpenSecrets, as I mentioned, dates back to the 80s, started by the hands of a few concerned citizens, two of whom were retired US senators, who saw a growing trend of money's influence in politics and often its interference with power. We began actually as two separate organizations, one dedicated to state data, the other federal. And one of our earliest bodies of work was actually the publication of a big, thick book titled OpenSecrets, measuring 3 inches tall. I'm not joking, it was 3 inches tall, and 1,500 pages deep, aggregating some of the earliest digestible data on money and politics. And with the dawn of the World Wide Web in the 90s, OpenSecrets pioneered a mighty website to digitize that data and make it open, available, and searchable to the public, a novel concept at the time. Over the years, we've updated, aggregated, and grown this data to form a key role in the work of this nation's transparency. And in fact, as I'm told by some, it's our work that has helped, in part, gently nudge the FEC to become more user-friendly too. As I look ahead, we have an exciting year to face, all of us. This election cycle alone has already seen more than $7.3 billion pour in across state and federal elections combined. I just got this figure from my staff today. From the short road toward the November election, to several developing initiatives underway within our own organization at OpenSecrets, I wanted to end with a few words of encouragement. A few weeks ago, I paid a visit to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Has anyone here been there? Yeah. One of the key sites of the Civil War, with a very layered history and some very steep mountains. I don't know if anyone's hiked up those mountains. During that visit, it was never before more clear to me than then that the road to a more perfect union is most definitely imperfect, layered, and steep. Just like this country made it to the other side then, I do believe that in moments of disruption or bumpiness, that staying committed to our values will help us make it through again. And to me, that's staying steadfastly committed to transparency. Because accountability depends on transparency. Because fairness depends on transparency. And because trust depends on transparency. And at the end of the day, democracy depends on transparency. And so may we all continue to pursue these, both in earnest and in collaboration. Thank you.